Pacific Reckoning, 2:17 a.m. Western Pacific Standard Time. The Taiwan Strait at this hour is 24 nautical miles at its narrowest crossing. Surface temperature 23 degrees Celsius, moderate sea state, overcast at 3,000 feet. Commercial shipping traffic had been thinning for 4 days. A pattern flagged by maritime analysts on day 2, elevated to priority assessment status by 3 intelligence agencies within 6 hours, and delivered to INDOPACOM by 11 p.m. the previous evening. The watch had been extended. Both carrier groups had repositioned. At 2:17 a.m., the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force's Eastern Theater Command initiated its launch sequence. The first signatures appeared simultaneously across 11 fixed and mobile positions along the Fujian coast. D-F-21 D anti-ship ballistic missiles, theater range systems optimized for exactly the target sets now positioned 900 to 1,400 kilometers to the east. Their launch plumes rose above the coastal ridgeline in near-simultaneous ignition, each missile climbing on a trajectory calculated to place its maneuvering re-entry vehicle in the terminal phase directly over one of 6 assigned naval targets. They were not the primary wave. From interior positions in Jiangxi and Zhejiang provinces, 4 DF-17 hypersonic glide vehicles separated from their boost stages at 2:17 a.m. and began their glide trajectories at Mach 5+, flying at altitudes designed to remain below the optimum engagement envelope of ballistic missile defense systems and above the floor of conventional surface-to-air coverage. The DF-17S were not targeting the carrier groups. They were targeting Kadena Air Base on Okinawa and Andersen Air Force Base on Guam, the fixed air power infrastructure that would generate any sustained U.S. campaign in the Western Pacific. From the South China Sea, from submarine positions holding since the previous week, and from People's Liberation Army Navy surface combatants operating in the Philippine Sea, 193 YJ-18 and YJ-21 anti-ship cruise missiles entered their guidance profiles simultaneously. Total first wave, 26 DF-21D anti-ship ballistic missiles, 4 DF-17 hypersonic glide vehicles, 193 anti-ship cruise missiles from submarine and surface platforms, 223 weapons targeting U.S. naval and air power projection capability across the Western Pacific. The People's Liberation Army had committed its primary offensive capability. The People's Liberation Army Rocket Force's strategic planning had identified a specific window and acted on it with coherent internal logic, based on intelligence that was accurate in its assessment of individual U.S. capabilities and fundamentally mistaken in its assessment of how those capabilities operated as an integrated whole. Their operational assessment held that a simultaneous multi-vector saturation operation would divide U.S. defensive attention across 3 separate threat categories simultaneously. Their calculation was that no single defensive architecture could prioritize all 3 at once. The math, applied to each system independently, was not wrong. The DF-17 component addressed their primary operational concern, disabling Kadena and Andersen long enough to prevent sustained U.S. air response during the critical first 6 to 8 hours of a Taiwan Strait crossing. Their wargaming assessed an 84-minute window of reduced U.S. air response capability, enough for the first amphibious wave to depart port. The DF-17 had been developed precisely because the PLA had studied U.S. ballistic missile defense performance and identified the altitude band it was designed to exploit. The flaw was layered rather than singular. They had not accounted for B-2 and B-21 aircraft pre-positioned under emissions control across the Pacific. They had modeled Kadena as a single point of failure rather than a base with a secondary runway and dispersal options. Most critically, their ASBM terminal guidance required continuous data link updates from OTH radar systems along the Fujian coast, and their planning had not accounted for the speed at which U.S. electronic warfare assets would sever those data links before mid-course phase. The DF-17S would reach their targets. The ASBM salvo would push U.S. defenses to maximum engagement rate. The window they were designed to create would close faster than any PLA wargame had projected. 2:17 a.m. The space-based infrared system satellite covering INDOPACOM's area of responsibility registered the first launch signatures at 2:17 a.m. 15 simultaneous thermal plumes along the Fujian coast, classified as anti-ship ballistic missile class within 1.1 seconds of detection. The alert transmission reached NORAD, INDOPACOM, and the 7th Fleet Flag Bridge before any of the first wave had cleared 20,000 feet. The E-3 Sentry airborne warning and control aircraft on station 340 nautical miles east of the Philippines had been tracking the anomalous emission pattern from planned surface combatants for 11 minutes before launch. The systems operator on the AWACS was 31 years old, a technical sergeant with 9 years of airborne radar experience. At 2:17 a.m., 4 simultaneous track designations appeared on his scope that his threat library classified as DF-17 Hypersonic Glide Vehicle Boost Phase, a classification he had never seen on a live display in 9 years of operational service. The system's confidence interval read 94.7%. His training required confirmation before escalation. He confirmed in 2.3 seconds and transmitted the priority alert. The acknowledgement from INDOPACOM arrived 11 seconds later. The fastest confirmation to acknowledgement cycle in the system's operational history for a hypersonic glide vehicle detection event. INDOPACOM issued engagement authorization at 2:18 a.m. Every U.S. defensive system in the Western Pacific activated as a single integrated network. 2:19 a.m. The engagement geometry was fundamentally different from any previous U.S. ballistic missile defense scenario. 2 carrier groups separated by 340 nautical miles faced a combined salvo of 30 ballistic and hypersonic threats, while simultaneously managing 193 cruise missiles closing from multiple vectors. The scale exceeded any single defensive system's processing capacity. Every Aegis ship, every THAAD battery, every Patriot unit across Japan and Guam was operating through the Cooperative Engagement Capability data link as one architecture. The THAAD battery on Guam engaged the DF-17 targeting Anderson first. The DF-17's glide trajectory placed it at an altitude below THAAD's optimum engagement geometry and above the PAC-3 engagement ceiling, the precise envelope the system had been designed to occupy. The first THAAD interceptor missed. The DF-17's atmospheric skip maneuver placed it 340 meters outside the intercept vehicle's effective radius at closest approach. The guidance update required 1.4 seconds. A second interceptor was allocated automatically. It achieved proximity detonation parameters, but off-axis insufficient to disable the payload. The DF-17 continued toward Anderson. The PAC-3 MSE battery on the base perimeter engaged at terminal phase. Intercept at 2:23 a.m. at 1,800 meters altitude. The DF-17 payload was neutralized. Debris impacted the base perimeter fence line and a maintenance area adjacent to the runway. No personnel losses. Significant structural damage to 2 maintenance hangars. The primary runway remained operational. The second DF-17, targeting Kadena, was not intercepted. The PAC-3 battery at Kadena had been reallocated mid-engagement to address a simultaneous DF-21D track that had executed a terminal maneuver placing it outside the available THAAD solution. The reallocation decision, made by the network's fire control algorithm in 0.3 seconds, was correct given the threat prioritization calculations at that moment. The DF-17 reached Kadena's primary runway at 2:24 a.m. The impact created a 28-meter crater at the runway midpoint intersection. Kadena's primary runway was non-operational. The secondary runway remained intact. Flight operations reduced to 40% normal capacity for a projected repair window of 4 to 6 hours. The PLA had achieved one of their primary target effects. One of 4 DF-17S had reached its assigned target. Against the DF-21 DA-SBM Salvo, SM-3, Block 2. A batteries performed at their designed engagement rate. 17 of 26 ASBMs were intercepted in mid-course phase. 7 reached terminal phase and required SM-6 engagement. 4 were intercepted. 3 completed terminal maneuvers and continued. The Aegis Cruiser Screening Carrier Group 1 had expended 94% of its SM-6 ready load by 2:28 a.m. 3 ASBM tracks remained in terminal phase. 14 seconds between VLS state recognition and the first available CIWS engagement window. The commanding officer used 5 of them preparing the CIWS solution. 2 of the 3 terminal phase ASBMs were neutralized by CIWS at ranges of 1,200 and 900 meters. The third, terminal maneuver completed, now on a fixed ballistic trajectory, was engaged by SM-6 from the carrier on the last interceptor in that envelope. Intercept confirmed at 2:29 a.m. at 2,100 meters altitude, 18 kilometers from the carrier. The carrier group was intact. The cruise missile engagement presented the most sustained defensive challenge of the operation. 193 YJ-18 and YJ-21 systems, launched from 4 separate vectors, required simultaneous engagement across 2 carrier groups and their screening formations. SM-6 handled the outer engagement zone. CIWS handled the final layer. By 2:35 a.m., 171 of 193 cruise missiles had been neutralized. 22 reached the inner defensive perimeter. The destroyer on the western screening position of Carrier Group 2 intercepted 18 of those 22 at CIWS range. 4 penetrated to within 400 meters of the hull. 2 were neutralized by final CIWS engagement. 1 impacted the ocean 180 meters short of the hull. Proximity fuse, non-functional at terminal impact angle. The 4th impacted the destroyer's forward superstructure at 2:36 a.m. The hit was significant. The forward radar array was rendered non-operational. A fuel line in the forward machinery space ruptured, requiring isolation and damage control response. The ship maintained propulsion and retained its aft CIWS capability. The commanding officer assessed the vessel as operationally capable at reduced function and maintained station. The damage control team had the rupture isolated in 11 minutes. The ship would not be leaving the formation. By 2:40 a.m., 23 minutes after first PLA launch, the intercept phase was effectively complete. Of 223 weapons launched, 188 had been intercepted or neutralized. 35 had produced effects: the Kadena runway crater, the Anderson maintenance complex damage, the destroyer hit, and fragment impacts on 2 other escort vessels causing minor sensor array damage. No carrier had been hit. No carrier's flight operations had been suspended. The PLA had pushed U.S. defensive systems to their maximum engagement rate, scored 2 significant infrastructure effects, and achieved none of their 3 primary objectives. The 84-minute window for amphibious staging had not opened. 2:31 a.m. The Pacific Combined Air Operations Center had been processing the targeting cycle since 2:18 a.m. By 2:31 a.m., the execute package was complete. 347 aim points across 94 priority installations. The target list had been built over 4 years of collection, updated quarterly, wargamed against 11 different scenario variants. It was being executed now against the variant the planners had designated as most likely. Full PLARF commitment. Taiwan timeline. INDOPACOM transmitted the execute order at 2:33 a.m. The priority target set was not fixed installations. It was mobile. The PLARF's second salvo capability resided in its transporter erector launchers, systems that could relocate between launch windows, disappearing into highway tunnels and pre-surveyed forest positions across the Fujian and Zhejiang coasts. The U.S. had spent 4 years mapping those positions, cataloging the tunnel networks, tracking the road corridors used between launch events. F-35s operating in the sensor-to-shooter role had been building a real-time picture of TEL movements since 2 a.m. By 2:31 a.m., 61 TEL positions had been confirmed and assigned to weapons. 61 mobile systems, each capable of a second salvo, each representing a direct threat to the carrier groups and to Taiwan's defensive infrastructure, each one with a weapon now en route. The first Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missile Extended Range releases came from B-1B Lancers at 2:35 a.m., followed immediately by Tomahawk salvos from 3 Los Angeles-class and 1 Virginia-class submarine operating in the Philippine Sea. By minute 18 of the counter-operation, $1.1 billion in precision munitions were in flight toward the Fujian and Zhejiang coast. The invoice was still accumulating. 2:28 a.m. The EA-18G Growler package had been operating under pre-authorized electronic warfare protocol since 2:28 a.m. 6 minutes before the execute order, permitted to begin as soon as the first PLA launch was confirmed. The Growler's primary target was the over-the-horizon radar network providing targeting data link updates to the PLARF's ASBM guidance systems. Severe that data link and any second salvo ASBM would be navigating on pre-programmed coordinates, accurate to carrier positions at launch authorization, diverging from actual positions by 400 to 800 meters per minute of flight time. The Fujian Coastal OTH radar at the primary Longtian site was engaged by AARGM-ER anti-radiation missiles at 2:31 a.m. The radar went offline at 2:32 a.m. The backup node near Fuzhou continued operating, outside the primary jamming envelope and not listed in the initial suppression package. An F/A-18F crew identified the active emission via the Growler data link at 2:33 a.m. and requested engagement authorization. Authorization arrived at 2:36 a.m. The backup node was neutralized at 2:37 a.m. The 5-minute gap between primary and backup node suppression had no effect on the first wave engagement. The ASBM salvo was already in terminal phase before either node went offline. Any second PLORF salvo attempted in the following 40 minutes would be navigating without real-time targeting updates. U.S. Cyber Command had been inside the PLARF's targeting coordination network since 2:19 a.m., through access established 8 months earlier. The operation introduced a systematic 12-second delay in all authenticated command transmissions, enough to disrupt the timing synchronization that coordinated multi-unit PLARF salvos. The PLARF's secondary launch authority spent 14 minutes troubleshooting authentication failures before their technical staff identified the source. Those 14 minutes were operationally decisive. By 2:40 a.m., PLARF command and control was operating at significantly degraded capacity. Not severed. Degraded. 2:35 a.m. The first TEL engagement confirmed at 2:41 a.m. F-35 sensor-to-shooter pairing with JASSMER, targeting a TEL unit that had repositioned to a pre-surveyed forest track 12 kilometers inland from the Fujian coast. The vehicle had been tracked continuously since 2:19 a.m. It had been assigned a weapon at 2:31 a.m. It ceased to function as an operational platform at 2:41 a.m. The sensor-to-shooter cycle, F-35 ISR identification to JASSMER impact, had executed in 10 minutes. By 2:55 a.m., 38 of 61 priority TEL positions had been engaged. The remaining 23 were in tunnel complexes or under overhead cover requiring GBU-class penetrating munitions rather than the JASSMER's standard configuration. B-2 Spirit aircraft operating from Diego Garcia had been assigned those 23 positions specifically. They were 340 minutes from weapons release. In the South China Sea, Tomahawk salvos from the submarine force simultaneously addressed the artificial island infrastructure. Fiery Cross Reef's radar installation and airfield facility received 12 Tomahawk impacts over 4 minutes, beginning at 2:43 a.m. Mischief Reef's port facility and fuel storage infrastructure followed at 2:47 a.m. Subi Reef's communications relay and air defense radar site at 2:51 a.m. Each island's military infrastructure, constructed over a decade at a combined estimated cost exceeding $3.1 billion, was systematically rendered non-operational through weapon-to-target matching refined over 3 years of collection. By minute 22 of the counter-operation, the United States had expended $1.8 billion in precision munitions. The invoice was still building. At 2:53 a.m., one Tomahawk received a mid-flight targeting update for a relocated PLARF support vehicle. The original position vacated between weapons assignment and impact window. The missile navigated to the updated coordinate and impacted at 3:01 a.m. No human intervention required. The H-6 bomber forward staging bases at Liang and Anqing received JASSMER salvos beginning at 2:58 a.m. The hardened aircraft shelters were the priority aim points, not the runways. Runways could be repaired. Aircraft rendered non-operational inside their shelters represented years of production investment that could not be quickly reconstituted. At 3:04 a.m., the B-1B Lancer lead aircraft experienced a weapons bay actuator fault, a hydraulic fault code requiring the crew to cycle the system twice before confirming full-door travel. The cycle consumed 41 seconds. The aircraft continued on heading, completed the door cycle, and released its remaining 6 JASSM-ERs at 3:05 a.m. All 6 impacted their assigned aim points. The fault had consumed 41 seconds and a minor fuel reserve. No aim points were missed. 3:02 a.m. The Eastern Theater Command's reserve had been held in dispersed posture across 3 airfields in Fujian and Zhejiang provinces. A regiment of H-6N bombers, each carrying one YJ-21 hypersonic air-launched missile. The YJ-21 was the system held back when everything else had been committed. Hypersonic, approximately 1,000-kilometer range, designed to be launched from outside U.S. air defense coverage and approach at Mach 4+ on a trajectory SM-6 could engage but not reliably intercept. The Eastern Theater Commander authorized the H-6N launch at 3:02 a.m. 8 H-6N aircraft were airborne by 3:09 a.m., climbing to release altitude on a northeastern heading toward the Philippine Sea. The E-2D Hawkeye radar aircraft with Carrier Group 2 acquired the H-6N formation at 3:11 a.m. F-22 Raptors already on combat air patrol at 45,000 feet were vectored to intercept at 3:12 a.m. The geometry favored the U.S., the F-22s were positioned between the H-6N formation and the carrier, and the H-6N's required release point was ahead of the intercept position. They had to fly through the F-22 threat envelope to reach their launch parameters. 6 of the 8 H-6Ns were engaged before reaching their release envelope. 2 pilots pressed through and launched their YJ-21s before their aircraft were engaged. 2 YJ-21s were now in flight toward the carrier group. SM-3 Block 2. A engaged the first YJ-21 at extreme range, an engagement the Aegis fire control algorithm assessed at 43% intercept probability. The probability was sufficient for engagement authorization. The intercept vehicle achieved proximity detonation at 3:19 a.m. The YJ-21's guidance system was severed. It impacted the ocean 140 kilometers short of the carrier group. The second YJ-21 was engaged by SM-6 at closer range. 2 interceptors allocated, both achieving proximity parameters. Neutralized at 3:21 a.m., 67 kilometers from the carrier. The reserve had been committed and had not reached its targets. The Eastern Theater Command had expended every available offensive capability. 3:15 a.m. The PLARF's targeting and coordination network had been progressively degrading since 2:37 a.m. The 12-second authentication delay injected by U.S. Cyber Command had been identified and partially bypassed by 3 a.m. But the bypass required switching to a lower bandwidth protocol that reduced message throughput by 60%. By 3:15 a.m., TEL units in the field were receiving tactical coordination updates at less than one-third the required frequency for synchronized multi-unit operations. The Eastern Theater Command's last authenticated order to PLARF field units was transmitted at 3:18 a.m. It ordered a hold on further launch activity pending system restoration. No acknowledgement was received from 23 of 31 addressees. The 8 that acknowledged reported position compromise or systems damage. The order to hold was an acknowledgement that there was nothing further to coordinate. The PLARF had not been eliminated as a military organization. It had been rendered non-coherent as a coordinated force. The distinction would matter in the hours that followed. In the operational window it defined, it was sufficient. 3:05 a.m. to 3:47 a.m. The B-2s reached their release windows beginning at 3:05 a.m., working northward through hardened tunnel complexes along the Fujin interior, GBU-57. Massive ordnance penetrator releases against pre-surveyed mountain positions used as protected TEL reload sites. Seismograph stations in Taiwan and the Philippines registered sequential 2.0 to 2.4 magnitude geological events over a 31-minute window. The analysts on duty already knew their source. The final Tomahawk impacts against artificial island military infrastructure occurred at 3:47 a.m. The active weapons employment phase of the counter-operations first cycle was complete. The watch officer in the Pacific Combined Air Operations Center had been on duty since midnight. He had managed the targeting cycle for the largest U.S. precision engagement package since the opening weeks of Operation Iraqi Freedom. He watched Aimpoint 94 confirm neutralized on his display. He transmitted the completion report to INDOPACOM, 4 words, standard format, and turned to the retargeting team. He asked what was on the follow-on list. There was always a follow-on list. This was not the end of the conflict. Both parties understood this. The first 90 minutes had established parameters, not outcomes. The U.S. had absorbed significant hits. Kadena primary runway non-operational for 4 to 6 hours, 1 destroyer mission-degraded, Anderson maintenance complex requiring assessment. Consequential costs, not strategic defeats. Carrier-based aviation operated continuously throughout, launching precision packages within 13 minutes of the execute order. Japan's government requested immediate consultation. The UN Security Council convened within 3 hours. The Taiwan government transmitted a single-sentence communication to the State Department duty officer at 3:30 a.m. local time. It asked when the next update would be provided. U.S. munitions expenditure for the first cycle, $2.7 billion. Tomahawk restocking estimated at 16 to 20 weeks. F-35 precision munitions requiring resupply within 72 hours to maintain tempo. Time from first launch detection to completion of counter-operation first cycle, 90 minutes. Adversary weapons launched. ASBM and HGV first wave, 30, 26DF, 21D, 4DF, 17 HGV. Cruise missile first wave, 193. Reserve H-6NYJ-21 Hypersonic, 2 missiles launched. Total, 225. Intercept rate, ASBM and HGV first wave, 86.7%, 26 of 30 neutralized. Intercept rate, cruise missile wave, 88.6%, 171 of 193 neutralized. Intercept rate, YJ-21 reserve, 100%, 2 of 2. Combined intercept rate, 88.4%. Effects from non-intercepted weapons. Kadena primary runway non-operational 4 to 6 hours. Anderson Maintenance Complex structural damage. 1 destroyer mission-degraded, operationally capable. 2 escort vessels minor sensor array damage. 0 carriers hit. 0 carrier flight operations suspended. Counter-operation first cycle munitions deployed. 61 JASSMER for TEL engagements, 84 Tomahawk for artificial island infrastructure and PLARF logistics, 8 GBU-57 MOP for tunnel complexes, 6 AARGMER for radar suppression, 12 air-to-air missiles for H-6N intercept sequence. Total, 171 distinct precision munitions plus defensive interceptors. Priority installations neutralized or operationally degraded. 94 of 94 first-cycle aim points confirmed or assessed probable. PLARF mobile TEL operational capability estimated reduced 34 to 41%. Artificial island military infrastructure operationally disrupted across all 3 primary sites. H-6N, reserve force capacity reduced by 75%. U.S. assets, 1 destroyer mission degraded, operationally capable at reduced function. Kadena, temporary primary runway outage. Personnel, 4 injured during damage control operations aboard the destroyer. All retained duty status. Total U.S. munitions cost, first cycle, $2.7 billion. Estimated value of adversary military infrastructure operationally degraded, $9.8 billion. Assessment: PLARF first wave offensive capability reduced to below coordinated salvo threshold for the immediate operational period. Carrier-based aviation maintained continuous operations throughout. U.S. counter-operation capacity intact and prepared for second cycle. The PLA had invested 23 years constructing the capability they committed in those 90 minutes. The first cycle reduced it by an estimated 38%. The second cycle was already being planned. They had made their bet on the first 90 minutes being decisive. The first 90 minutes had concluded. The bet had not paid.